It's always such a pleasure to be here with the Senior Center and doing our Bainbridge Remembers Oral History Series with the Senior Center. And welcome everybody. It's fun to see you. I will say that I am coming to you from the land of the Spokane peoples, as I am in Spokane just yesterday for Mother's Day, watching my daughter graduate from Gonzaga. So the purpose of our meetings here are just to reflect and hear different perspectives on Bainbridge Island, to learn from our neighbors, to share experiences and stories of Bainbridge, and to honor the voices of our community members. And this being the Heritage Month, the AAPI Heritage Month, we're especially acknowledging the Filipino history on the island and connection to the island. And today we have two members of the Filipino community. I'll have them introduce themselves, two very dear people to me, Doreen Rapada and her granddaughter, Reanna Rapada. So Doreen, welcome. Would you like to please introduce yourself?
I'm Doreen Rapada, and I've been raised on this island my entire life. Would you like me to tell me about my mom and dad?
Well, I'd like to introduce, thank you, Doreen. Yes, there's so much about you that I know we could take a long time introducing yourself, but yes, I want to hear about your mom and dad after we hear just briefly. Reanna, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Reanna Rapada. I am the oldest granddaughter of Doreen and Dan Rapada, and I am an educator here at Wilkes on Bainbridge.
Thank you so much for coming to us in the middle of your work day with the children at Wilkes.
Oh yeah, thank you.
So Doreen, yes, we would love to hear. Would you please share about how your parents met?
Oh, well, my parents met right here in Bainbridge Island. Actually, way back when the Japanese used to go up to and get the First Nations families over in Canada. And they bring them down to pick berries on Bainbridge Island. Then after that, the Japanese were put into the camps and stuff. Filipinos took over and they got the First Nations down here too. And my mom and dad, my mom was over at the Dan Buxett farm with my aunt and my uncle and my first cousin and stuff, and they were staying there. And actually, Dan Buxett, the farm was all the way where the library is, all the way around that whole area. And like that blue heron or that pond actually was an irrigation pond for the strawberries, because Dan Buxett, his strawberry field went all the way down to the highway 305. And my mom was there, and my dad, he had his farm too up over there in by Day Road. And he went down to visit his friend Dan Buxett, and then he saw my mom picking berries in the field, and he fell in love with her, and that was it. Love between the berry patch.
That's such a wonderful story. And so when did that happen again? That was about...
Oh, yeah, well, that was in 1942.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah, 1942, and they got married July 25th, 1942.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, how did your dad make it to Bainbridge Island?
Well, actually, my dad came over from the Philippines, from Manila, and landed in Seattle in June 1929. He came on the President Madison boat, ship, I guess you'd call it. And he went down to California, and he was working down there as a houseboy for down in San Francisco, for one of the guys down there, and a driver and a chauffeur. Then he came back up here to Seattle, and that's where basically all the Filipinos were going over to the canneries in Seattle, in Alaska, Then they'd come back down and they'd go and stay in International District in Chinatown in Seattle. And they found out the Japanese had farms over here and they had bunkhouses. And they could go over there and live in the bunkhouses and take care of the berries and not pay rent, I guess you'd say. That's how it all started. And so my dad came to the Bainbridge Island in 1938.
1938. Wow.
1938.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, you were going to say something. I don't want to stop you. So
Well, I forgot what I was going to say anyway.
Okay. So Reanna, I was wondering, how did you get into learning more about your family's history?
Well, as everyone knows my grandma, they know that she's a walking, talking textbook. Like, she remembers just literally everything. But actually for me, I was in high school and I went to Seattle Central for Running Start, and I had English 102 and we had to write a research paper. And I wrote my research paper on how the Filipinos took care of the Japanese farms while they were in internment camp. Kind of a little funny story that relates to the Historical Society is I got a call from someone from the museum, and I don't know what happened. My phone had lost the voicemail, but they wanted to put my paper in the museum. But by then I didn't know where it went. But that's kind of how I started getting into learning more about my family history. And it's super important, I think, to keep everything going on as you go through generations. I now have a daughter who I hope to pass on all this information to one day.
Oh, that's wonderful. So you had to, the history, the actual history was really when you were prompted to ask for it. I mean, to work, to research it, which is so interesting, because I think sometimes our elders feel like the younger generations kind of know the history and from picking it up. And so it's interesting, and I encourage all grandparents to tell your stories to your grandchildren.
Yeah, I think that's definitely super important. I mean, especially within our culture, it's a lot of oral history and passing down those stories and those traditions, or else they'll be lost. And so definitely write down your stories and record them. I know both my grandparents have plenty of oral history down at the museum, so that's great. But it's also a really good a place and time to make a connection.
Thank you. Yeah.
I also wanted to point out that, I don't know, I'm sure a lot of you have seen Island Roots, that video that was made. I don't remember the year, but I remember seeing it
2007.
in the Linwood Theater. I remember going to see the premiere, but actually as an educator now at Wilkes, a lot of our fourth graders, that's what they learn about when they learn about Washington State history, is they watch that video and they have a whole unit. So I'm so proud. It's in the right direction of education and getting in the schools and heard about.
Okay, so you're saying when your child goes through Bainbridge schools, she'll know a little bit more about it maybe than you did, right?
Well, she hopefully will be able to teach the class.
Yes, absolutely. I don't doubt that. So Doreen, I know that one of the places that has lots of history on Bainbridge Island is the Filipino-American Hall. And I was wondering if you could tell the history of the Filipino-American Hall to us.
Oh, yes. Filipino Hall, actually, it's originally was 10 acres in the hall. And there was five Filipinos, the founders, that used their farm money back in 1942 and bought the hall and the acreage for the Filipino community. So the Filipino community will have a place to meet and dance and just have fun. And those five founders of the Filipino community were starting with the alphabetical order, my dad, Felix Almazan, Daniel Buxit, Anacleto Corpus, Toby Membrari, and Felix Nardi. And that's what they did. And they started that hall and everything else and brought everybody in. And then the army wanted a lot of the acreage for their Nike site. And so they took 7.5 acres, and we ended up with 2.5 acres left with the hall. And that's how that went. And so the 5 founders they gave them the money for the property. And the 5 founders went over there and invested in the town and country before it was built. As you know, stock in there, but yeah, that's how that went. And then actually, when the Nike site, when all the soldiers moved out, they sold the 7.5 acres to Bainbridge for $1.
Oh my gosh.
And they didn't even ask the Filipino community if they wanted to buy it back.
Wow. Wow.
But we probably couldn't afford it anyway because everybody had big families.
Well, it's certainly a landmark of history, you know, on the island. It's certainly an important gathering place. And I can remember, I think our friend Gina Corpus was telling us that it was almost like a place where the children would gather, and it was its own like safe place for children to gather and get to know each other. And
Yes, it was. We always got together on Christmas and Easter and all the different things, had Easter hunts for the kids. Yeah, and there was a place Saturday night dances with a Filipino band. So yeah, it was a good place. But then it's fallen apart and everything else because it was so old. But they brought that hall over there, and actually it was from over there at the mill, the Blakely Mill. And yeah, but now it's a historic. They have it under the historical deal because the Filipino community, Bainbridge Filipino Community Hall, is the oldest Filipino community hall in the state of Washington. And the next oldest is over in Yakima.
oh my goodness. Wow. I
Now,
mean,
yeah, we're on a historical deal, so we couldn't sell it if we wanted to.
right, right. Well, it's such a treasure to the whole community. So, and it's so important. It is, I mean, it's another first on the island, right? It's another first, and in this area. And I was just reading about this 2021 census, and for groups of Asians, Filipino Americans are second to the Chinese Americans in the US, and the largest population of Asians in Washington state. So I didn't know if everybody knew that, but I found that it's important history, a very important history. So then, Reanna, do you remember any celebrations at the hall?
There are definitely like regular, I mean, obviously not now because of coronavirus and the pandemic, but during regular years, we always have Christmas parties, and we still have Easter hunts. And I think the biggest one that also a lot of the community is a part of would be the Strawberry Festival. And that's a big one, and it's really important, I think, to the Filipino community in inviting the entire community to celebrate. One big thing is everyone helps out. You know, the cooks they help out. Everyone helps set up and clean up, and I think it's just a really great place with so much history. And I think now, in the past few years, Grandma, you might have to help me with this, but who has made the timeline of the Filipino families inside the hall? Did Pinky Madaeg help with that?
Oh, doing what?
Where there's every name of all the families, there's like family trees in there now.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
He was really doing that because he'd
Yeah.
give me a call all the time. And finally one time he called and talked to your Papa Dan, and he says, well, you get that pot of coffee on, Doreen and I will come down there and we'll put it together. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, so I
That's
think
what we did.
it's a really great place where everyone can just kind of relax and have fun together and just kind of be together as a community. We don't see each other very often. I mean, we all have, of course, our own lives, our own families. So I think it's very important, and I can't wait to, take my daughter to her first strawberry festival.
Well, they also have weddings too and everything else there at the community hall,
Yep, birthday parties, everything,
birthday parties, you bet.
memorials, you name it.
And anybody can rent it.
I remember, yeah, the community can rent it out. I know that the One Call for All does their stuffing parties every year, there. And so that's such a fun tradition. They stuff envelopes for the One Call for All. And I also remember once upon a time there was like something called Sing Out. And it was like an African-American celebration of song, and it would come in January, kind of around Martin Luther King Day. And I remember coming in for that. And of course, now we have Filipino American Heritage Month in October. So then we also have Indigenous Peoples Day. So there's lots and lots of celebrations, lots and lots of celebrations.
I think you're on mute. You're on mute, Katie.
Sorry. Reanna, I was wondering, do you have any stories you can share about being multicultural and about your Filipino plus heritage?
Yeah, I would say that, well, first of all, a little background. Growing up on the island, there's not many groups that you can join where they celebrate diversity, celebrate culture, where you learn about it. You don't really learn about it too much in school. I mean, there's maybe a couple units or two. And I was always, of course, the one that was asked to help celebrate those or give my input. I would say I would have to start back in Ordway. There was a program, I think Kathleen Ramsey, who was a music teacher then, helped initiate it. And of course, my grandpa, he was a drum maker and a carver. So he donated a huge powwow drum to the school, and we had a program that was sharing the drum. So that was actually, it's been a huge part of my life, not just then, but even now, still my classmates, I'm going to be 27 this month, and they still say, hey, I remember you sharing the drum and doing all that. So I think that was really great. But other than that, I think I haven't been too involved, I want to say, growing up. But now that I'm an educator and finishing my degree in teaching and seeing all the education in our schools now on the island, I think it's very important to bring diversity, bring culture in the classroom. And I do plan to go for my master's in multicultural education pretty soon. So I'm actually the first in my family to graduate college. So I'm very excited about that. And I am almost done. I'm in my last class. So I would say that I think the thing is bringing more culture so that people and students are more comfortable talking about it and celebrating it, and to realize that just because it's not your own culture, you can't celebrate it. You can. So I think that's very important, and I think that's kind of one thing that the communities around the island have tried to do in the past few years, is to get people to have their voices heard, like you guys are doing now, which is great, and to have people be more involved. I think that's super important. So yeah, I'm sorry I don't have too many stories of growing up because there wasn't much, but I'm hoping to change that, and I'm hoping that it evolves.
Thank you. That's wonderful. What an incredible contribution you made. I mean, and it's true. It's memorable, right? It's memorable when you can add culture to a classroom, and people are still remembering, you know, your grandpa and you sharing that about with the drum and stuff. Yeah, I miss him. I miss him.
Yeah, same. We all do, and I think it's really great to keep, you know, certain traditions alive and going. I mean, during sharing the drum, we would bring in members from the Suquamish tribe. So I think having that relationship too is very important, and it definitely leaves a lasting effect when you can get people actually in person and hear firsthand their stories.
Yeah.
Dan had a big influence with the senior center in that he was very involved in the co-ed baseball team. And
Yeah.
oh yeah, and he was fantastic. He was such a help to me. Okay, he would say, "Okay, Sheila, this is the bat you want to use today." Okay, yes, sir. It was Dan. Dan was a dear, dear friend. I miss him. I miss him a lot.
I really appreciate those kind words. And he was a great pitching coach. I played for multiple years softball. He was great.
Let's see, I wanted to, first of all, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I do want to recognize Pinky Mariag for doing all of that wonderful history work, which is in the Filipino American Hall for anybody who is interested in more of, it's just a wonderful historic site and lots of history. And then also Gilda Corpus and Anna Hansen also have done a lot of work and did a wonderful exhibit for Veterans Day, because being veterans is important to the community too, I think. And so I was wondering, Doreen, would you let us know, how did you meet that wonderful guy, Dan? What was that like?
We met in school, of course. Well, he was raised up here on the island too. Dan down over well, the Rapada house is up over there too, you know. They've been on the island all these years. That's how I met him through school. And one of the dances at the Filipino Hall. Just clicked and that was it. We were married for almost 58 years before he passed.
Oh, that's wonderful. Do you remember when you first met him at school? Were you in Bainbridge High School or?
Yeah, Bainbridge High School, huh? I met him before, yeah. When I was a freshman. Yeah, we were just together all the time. And we always did everything together. He did his softball and whatever. He enjoyed it. And he retired at age 55, civil service. Yeah, so he started playing softball and everything else, joined the senior center. Well, actually, I had him join the co-ed senior center softball team because of his age, because he was playing with all younger guys. And I thought to myself, well, that'll fix him. So he started doing it, and actually that ended up just practice. That was just practice to play his other games. And he was on 3 teams. One of them was the Crown Royals, and then that's on Bainbridge. Then he went with the Clean and Sober League over in Suquamish. There was a Suquamish team and the Little Boston team. They were all combined together, all the youth and everything else, and he pitched. He was a real mentor to all of them too, an example on the Clean and Sober League.
Yeah. I am so grateful to both you and to Dan, because often you would come to historical museum programs and you would share your stories and go into the schools with us. And I remember we had an outside event once, and he had some of his carvings that were there, and that was really wonderful as well.
Yeah, he did a lot of drum making for the schools too, like the senior class over in Kingston High School. He went and taught drum classes all over the place too, in the schools, to show them how to do that. Maybe about quite a few of them.
That was actually my senior project for high school. Was he taught me how to make a drum. And in our culture, it's important that the first thing that you make, you have to give it away. So I ended up giving it to Kathleen Ramsey, the music teacher at Ordway. It was very special.
Wow. Wow. Do you have is it appropriate for me to ask, and do you have an idea of that tradition of it's important that the first thing you make, you give away? That's such a beautiful sounding.
Yeah, I think my grandma can actually talk
Okay.
more about it.
Yeah, that is a native tradition. The first thing, that drum that you make, you give it away, or whatever you make, you give away, or carving, carving. That's the way they do it. But with the same thing, that whatever you give away comes back to you.
Isn't that
different
wonderful?
ways.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So, Doreen, if it's okay with you, I was reminded because Reanna mentioned, she's a first in her family that's going to graduate from college, and I am part of the Multicultural Advisory Council, and I know that council started because there was people came to the school board and protested. Basically, were just sharing. They weren't protesting, but it was a wonderful act to share their stories about the inequities that in the ways that the Indopino children were being treated, and the Filipino and Indopino. And I just wonder if you remember or can say anything about this idea that I had, which was at one point, people would identify as Filipina and not as much as Native. Do you remember?
Well, yeah, pretty much so, because actually our fathers were down over here, and the mothers came from Canada, and actually just about every one of the mothers ended up were in residential boarding school, like my mom. My mom was in residential boarding school from the age five till they kicked them out at age 16. And well, my mom was only 5, but she was born in 1923. And when she was 5 years old, that's when the Depression started, and there was just nothing, no work, nothing to eat. So that's where they went. And they stayed there, and they just came home in summers.
So then on Bainbridge Island, when she met someone Filipino and then had children, I know you've told me before that that her culture was really strong in your upbringing.
Yeah, it really was. My mom was a very strong person, and my dad was, he was a really nice person too. I really, they raised me. But yeah, life wasn't all that easy either on the island. And all of us girls used to go, when we used to walk, we used to go 2 by 2.
Wow.
Never alone.
Well, this is interesting because this year is the real big protests against, Asian violence. We really have to acknowledge that Asian violence.
Well,
and you knew about it.
Yeah. Well, the reason why my dad decided that he's going to stay here on the island is because after he and a lot of the Filipinos came over and stayed in the bunkhouses of the Japanese and took care of their farm and everything else. And then because they were going to Alaska in the summer, but they took care of the berries during the winter. And they went over there because they were just getting maybe 5 cents an hour and everything else, working in the canneries over there, and they're working them almost 24 hours a day and not giving them overtime or anything. So the Filipino community wanted to go and start a union. So my dad and his friend caught the ferry and went over there to, but it's by the University, Seattle University. That's where Margaret, her name is, she eventually married Miss Lang, but her husband was the one that was leading it, and he passed away. So I don't remember his last name was. But anyway, they went up there for a meeting and everything else, and they were trying to get a union going. And so after the meeting, my dad and his friend were walking down to the ferry dock, and they were walking on the waterfront. Then pretty soon they saw all these guys, and they had, flashlights, and they had those, what do you call it, those, well, anyway, they had sticks and bats and everything else, and they had those, what do you call it, those torches. And they were walking on the waterfront, and they started calling them names and everything else. I don't even want to mention. But my dad didn't tell me about this until after. I was about 12 years old, and my mom said, well, when they start chasing them, his friend ran one way, my dad ran one way, but my dad was by Pier 60, and he got underneath that manhole and was holding on to posts under the pier. And then when everything quieted down and everything else, my dad came out and he was just shivering and cold, and he went to look for his friend, and they had killed his friend.
Oh,
Don't even know what his name was or anything, because I was going to ask my dad and ask him a whole bunch of questions, but my mom said no. That's the first she ever heard about it too. It's just let him get that part out.
wow. Thank you for sharing that.
And so that's why he said, that's it. I'm going to stay on Bainbridge Island and buy my own farm. I'm not going to Alaska anymore.
Wow, that's amazing. And so he was able to buy land here on the island.
Yeah, he was. Well, he did part of Akio Suimatsu's, but a lot of the other people were doing part of Akio's property too. But my dad just did the Olympic berries. They were great big berries. So he did that with Akio. And then he and Tom Emuela over there, the Furukawa land that's on Day Road, both of them were partners, and they rented that, they leased that, and they were both partners.
Mm.
And when Tom and Dorothy got married, and then they were in that house, and then my mom and dad got married. My mom says, she's my tribal member and everything else, and she's my real good friend, but I don't think two housewives can live in the same house. So anyway, across the pasture there was another old house that my dad rented, and so they stayed in there, but they were partners. And then after a while, when they got enough money, my dad went and bought that 5 acres right there on 305. And so he and mom moved over there. And then my dad on Love Green, that's on Love Green Road, my dad went and bought 20 acres from Pope and Talbot at $50 an acre. And then he went and had that cleared, because my uncles and my first cousins on my mom's side, they were all loggers and stuff, so they logged that whole thing. That's why it's all clear now. I think it's equestrian now.
Mm.
So yeah, that they cleared that off in berries, and then pretty soon Highway 305 came through.
Oh, right through the land?
Well, no, right in the bottom. But they took 3 acres for the highway.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah. And he had a pie wedge on the other side, but yeah, that's, but we used to go walk all the way up to Madison Avenue to go catch our school bus before the highway went through.
Wow.
Uh-huh.
So you had a school bus that you caught, though. There were
Oh
school buses.
yeah, they had the big
Okay.
white bus shed up top of the hill.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to catch the school bus, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Wow, what a wonderful picture you're painting of the island. It's just amazing. So your dad grew those bigger Olympic berries. They were more stable.
No, that Olympic berries were Akio's before during the
okay.
war, and my
Mhm.
dad grew the strawberries, and it was the Marshall strawberries. But
Mhm.
that whole neighborhood was pretty much Filipino, because my dad had 20 acres here on this side over there. That's now Charles Place, Pleasant Place, Viewcrest, and everything else. That was all Victor Corpus's property. It was over 20
Oh.
acres too. And right over across the road, that was Garcia Emuela's farm. And on top too. So, and then right across from my dad's property on the other side, that's a Takamoto property.
Mhm.
So that was really, yeah, all the farmers there. And then actually a friend of mine told me that when she was working down at the power company down Winslow, the ones that used to that work for the kitchen for the electricity, they used to call it Little Manila. So it's around that area.
It was
My
really,
corpus. Yeah.
it was really a farming village right there, farming
Yeah, it
town.
was.
And a lot of, and were there, what other things were people growing? Were they mainly all strawberries, or were there any other types of food? Or
Well, actually, my dad had a great big vegetable garden. So did my father-in-law, Papa Rapada, Grandpa Rapada. He had a big. We had all our fresh vegetables there, and then we had a lot of strawberries. That was a crop. I know Jean Buxett Kavanaugh told me that Dan Buxett, he used to go and do pick all the market berries and used to bring about put them on the truck and catch a ferry and bring about 100 flats over there to public market to sell.
wow.
Mm-hmm.
I see that somebody in the chat, and I want to invite our wonderful participants to write any questions in the chat, but somebody in the chat was asking about when was 305 put through? What time was that?
Well, that was late. Well, it had to be in 1950 because the bridge was built in 1952.
Okay.
But I remember walking up after they went and went through there, and then they went and paved it, asphalt.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, me and some of the other neighborhoods thought would be really funny. We took off our shoes and started running up. We got in trouble.
So running on asphalt, was it hot when you were running on it, or?
Oh, I don't remember getting burnt, but it sure was fun just to do something like that.
That sounds great. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Wow. So I was wondering, Reanna, do you have any stories from like when your relatives were farming that you wanted to share, or do you remember eating strawberries on the island, or were the strawberries already gone?
They were pretty much gone before, right, Ariana?
Yeah, they were definitely gone. I don't have any, I don't think, specific stories that I really remember. I mean, for me, like, I do have a pretty good memory, but I think writing them down are easier. One thing that I did want to answer was a question in the chat
Sure.
about the Indopino community. And
Okay.
for everyone who doesn't know, the Indopino community is, well, as my grandma was saying, her mother is from Canada and First Nations. So she's from Native tribe up in Canada, and her father is Filipino. And so if you put that together, it's Indopino. So there's a huge community of that around here, and especially around my grandma's time, because there were the Filipino immigrants that were a lot of men that came, and there were a lot of women from the First Nations in Canada and around up there that came, and they married. There was, I don't remember, but I did in Island Roots. There was how many weddings, Grandma, on the island?
Over 30, about 30, almost 40 weddings, yeah.
And most of them were Indopino couples, you know, so you have
Yeah,
the
they
women
all
that were,
are. They all are, because actually it wasn't until 1949 the Filipinos could go over to the Philippines and marry a bride over there, but they couldn't take them over back to the United States until 1949.
Mm-hmm.
So then they ended, well, they all ended up married natives, but then we're pretty much raised Filipino way, because we'd have the hall and stuff, and it'd be all the Filipino cooking with the woks and everything else, all the celebrations we used to have. They used to really do they used to do a lot of planting parties too, and get a pig and roast a pig and everything else. And then they'd go from one farm to the other to plant the strawberries, the new crops. That's how they did it.
Yeah, really supporting each other is, and the family supporting each other, and the Filipino men and the Native women, the women from Canada, and some women came from some American, I mean, not some tribes that were from more local. And the men really kind of, from what I understand, kind of took charge. And you can imagine that the women coming out of boarding schools, and then also they weren't necessarily from the same tribe. Some of them were from the same backgrounds, but not necessarily. And I think that there's a great trauma that you know, the people that had to live in the boarding schools went through. And so just recently, everyone should know that there is a Indopino film coming out. Gina Corpus is did a film called Honor Thy Mother, and she did exhibitions. She and others in the Indopino community did exhibitions that started, that showed in Kitsap County, and then we had it at the Historical Museum. And there's some incredible interviews that were done of the experience of the Indopino community. So,
Well, the ones that came from the Squamish Nation, we're at St. Paul's boarding school, and actually, like Dorothy Emuela, Mrs. Tom Emuela, she's Squamish Nation too, and she went to school with my mom. And my mom is Mildred Lewis Elmazon. She was a Catholic boarding school, residential boarding school too at St. Paul's, and so was Evelyn Corpus, Williams Corpus. That's Gina's mom. She's from North Vancouver too, Squamish tribe.
yeah.
Yeah, so I
And-
think it's, oh, sorry. Yeah, so I think it's important to recognize and acknowledge that our cultures are very blended. I mean, we grew up with both cultures and celebrating both cultures, and it's kind of been that way for a very long time. And I think it's just so, oh, that's so great. Thanks, Freed, for that info in the chat about Honor Thy Mother.
Yeah, I think that what's interesting is I read that, you know, the Philippines, of course, have over 7,000 islands, you know, and they've been colonized by the Japanese, by the US, all kinds of different colonization. And so in this article I heard, I read it, they indicated that it made sense that the Filipino people with the Filipino background would feel it was familiar, you know, to the Native American background or the tribal backgrounds. And I don't know anything about that. I just happened to read it recently, but it kind of made sense to me. And I just also wanted to mention, somebody said, when were the strawberries really big on Bainbridge? Like what decade was it that the strawberries were really growing? Do you know that, Doreen?
Well, the first berries that we ever had were actually the Marshall berries. That was a true berry, and they were really, really big, but it seemed like they really got played out too. So they started using different kind of berries. I think Northwest berries is the second one that you start planting.
And what decades were that? Do you happen to know?
I think it was the 30s and the 40s, and about around the 50s, that's when they everything kind of slowed down. But my father kept on farming strawberries until he passed away, and that was 1988.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm.
Thank you.
He did basically raspberries by then.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's see. So do we have anything in the chat that people would like to ask our honored guests? We have just about 5 more minutes. You could unmute too if you wanted to, because I don't think we have a whole lot of people.
Can I say something, Katie?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
sure.
Doreen, I'm wondering, did you, I had a friend, whose spouse was interned during the 40s and they moved to South Idaho for 3 years. They couldn't see each other. And the Filipino community took care of their farm during that time. Do you have any, did you have any encounters with people who were being interned?
Well, actually, it was before my time, because I was born in 1943.
Oh,
But actually, my dad was really feeling sad about everything too. So,
Mhm.
but what other question would you, well, actually, the one that really, Felix Nardi is the one that took care of the Kitamoto property, and I guess, you know, well,
Yeah,
anyway,
I remember Felix Jr. talking about the idea that they went over to Idaho a couple times, just maybe his dad did, I guess.
yeah, he did. He drove over there and brought the money and everything else, from the strawberry fields, from the strawberries and stuff, and he took care of their farm really well. And after they got back from the internment camp, they gave him that 5 acres that is right there on Miller Road, right by that where those car stations are. Gas station used to be.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. So it was really appreciated, and they kind of took care of one another. Isn't that something that in the Philippines, the Japanese and the Filipinos were fighting and everything else, and here on the island that this happened?
You know, it's really true. Lily Kodama loves to tell that story about how people would ask, well, you know, about getting along with the Filipinos on the island. And she was just completely clueless. She was like, yeah, why? You know, because it wasn't till she was older that she recognized that in the Philippines and in Japan, they're like they're arch enemies in history. But on Bainbridge, that just didn't manifest. You know,
Well, it's just like my dad. We always had pickers from Canada, a lot of the family relatives, and they stayed. My dad had 8 bunkhouses, so we had pickers there. And my dad, some days we just pick half a day, and then pretty soon, Mama Kitamoto would call my dad and said, "Oh, Felix, I really need some help on my raspberries." And he said, "Oh yeah, all of a sudden you can have my pickers. So we just picked this morning." So they'd send Lily with a farm truck and put all our pickers in the back and brought them to Kitamoto farm to pick raspberries. That's how it went.
Yeah, that's a really, really special relationship. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's really special.
so Doreen, when it was harvest time, did Filipinos and others pick together?
What do you mean pick together?
Well, when it was harvest time for the strawberries or the raspberries, because you'd need to get the fruit out of the vines in time.
Yeah, you did. That's why we had pickers coming from Canada. They used to come down and stay in our bunkhouses, and they would harvest the crops.
Mhm.
And
We had
were those
pigs and-
were those First Nations relatives or friends of yours?
Well, relatives, and then pretty soon different friends too that wanted to come down, because a lot of times a lot of them were longshoremen and welders, and when they went on strike and stuff, or you can't really in the summer because of the fires and stuff, the loggers. So they First Nation families came down.
Yeah, and it's interesting the way you phrased that question. Was you said, did they pick together? And my experience on Bainbridge is that, yeah, everybody picked together, including the high school kids would be let out of class. And we mentioned our dear friend Reed Hansen earlier, and he and his friends would talk about how, you know, they'd be in the strawberry fields and they'd be having a lot of fun, but there was like no way that they could possibly be as productive as the people that were coming from other places to pick. the farm, that pick the berries and everything. So there was a lot of respect. And yeah,
We found a lot of people, when Dad was playing softball too, we found they used to come to the island to pick strawberries too, when they were kids or high school students. They said they used to catch the foot ferry out of from Bremerton to Crystal Point. They have a dock over there. They had a foot passage ferry. They used to come over, and then a lot of the farmers would have their farm truck over there, and they just fill up the trucks, go to different farms. The pick berry.
Doreen, is that those the kids from Bremerton that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember when I was typing up the some of the Bainbridge Review articles for the library, that one of the consistent one was the buses going down, not the buses, because they wouldn't let the buses go, but the trucks would go out and down to and pick the kids up at from Bremerton. So
yeah,
they did, and some were on the foot ferries too.
I hate to be someone to be interrupting. However, there is a question that somebody wants to ask, and Reanna wants to answer it, and we only have officially 3 minutes. So let's see. How about Robin? Do you want to? Robin, do you want to unmute yourself and ask Reanna?
Yes. I had worked closely with Gina Corpus and the Pino group on the new film, and one of the things that in the production of it was how much discrimination people faced in the Bainbridge school system. So I'm wondering, Reanna, how much discrimination, how much you've faced in the Bainbridge school system when you were here, and if there's been any increase in this past year with everything that's been going on.
Awesome. Thanks, Robin. That's a really great question. And I think for me, growing up, I didn't face too much discrimination. Part of it was actually, I believe, because my mom is very, she's very Caucasian. So I'm very, very light skinned. So I think a lot of people probably wouldn't know about me or my heritage or my culture unless they asked, or if they personally knew me. So growing up, I didn't really have anything specific that happened to me. And I would say it's been a lot harder this year because everything's been online, and I've definitely seen in other places where it's, way more prominent. And we're very lucky here, I guess, in our little bubble that it doesn't happen as often as anywhere else. But it's also important to acknowledge. And I would say, though, one thing is I speak fluent Spanish. I am part Latina. And so I've actually been discriminated in the fact that, like, why do you speak Spanish? Like, you're so white, you speak Spanish. So that's where it comes for me. But it's so important, I think, to recognize in schools and have classes and talks about it, because I have heard some things, actually more of this year, it's been text that we're finding is very racist and discriminating in the schools. So we have to pull it very quick.
Doreen, did you have something to say too? It looked like you did, but.
Oh, me? There was a lot of prejudices as we went to school, because like we were the first in the Filipinos over there on the island and stuff. There was a lot of prejudice. And like I said, we girls used to walk 2 by 2 together, and they used to call us squaws and, things like that. Wasn't, you learned to just tune everything out, you didn't want to hear it. And we didn't want to go home and tell our mom and dad, because we were so happy that we're American citizens and we're going to school and everything else like that. So we didn't want to hurt their feelings.
Yeah, that's one thing that's
because there's nothing they can do about it anyway.
I think that's one thing also that's important to touch on is people that are immigrants and they don't speak maybe such good English, and they raise and have children, they're very proud of their children to be American, to be a citizen, that you know, that's how some cultures get lost, is that the parents don't speak the language because they're like, no, they're too afraid. They want them to be blending in. But it's definitely important to have that balance, you know? So I think that, you know, you can kind of see now more as in our day now, as in our school system, we have dual language, we have, you know, Spanish immersion, that parents want their children to learn other languages and other cultures. So I think it's important to acknowledge that. Like, it's changed, I think, from since my grandma grew up, you know, her parents were so proud to, you know, have American children.
Well, can I
and
tell you something?
yeah,
Well, you know, my dad, he was Filipino and he had accent and everything else. And my mom went to the residential boarding school and she was really good in English and everything else. So my dad says, I want to talk proper English. So correct me when I say a word. And so she'd correct him, you know, and tell how to say it because didn't want to embarrass himself in public. And one time I was outside playing and my dad had a hammer and was hammering something. He hit his fingers. Oh, son of a bitch. And I went in there and told Mom, Dad hit his finger and he said, son of a bitch. Mom said, I'm not going to correct that. That sounds better.
And on that note,
Yeah.
that's great. I'm sorry. I'd love to keep on talking. This is just so wonderful. And thank you, Reanna, for sharing, and Doreen, for your truth. And it's just wonderful to get get your voices heard, and that you're so open to sharing. And I look forward to people on this call seeing us all, seeing each other soon at the Filipino American Hall and celebrating together. It was such an honor to prepare for this together.